The sky burned red like a fire, casting an eerie glow over the towering peaks of Manhwa. The wind howled through the cliffs, carrying the echoes of clashing swords. At the heart of the battle, two figures faced each other, their movements sharp and precise. The young warrior, known as the Phantom Swordsman, lunged forward with his sword, his energy surging through the blade. His strike aimed straight for the old man standing before him. The old man's eyes remained calm as he met the attack with his own sword. Their blades clashed, sending sparks flying in all directions. Old man spoke while holding back the boy's sword with effort. "I am impressed. You are still able to move despite such a grave injury. Your mental fortitude fits your title, Phantom Swordsman. I have to admit, the sword technique you created is impressive, too." The Phantom Swordsman clenched his jaw, refusing to back down. But before he could make his next move, the old man suddenly shifted his stance. With a powerful push, he forced the young swordsman back, sending him flying through the air. The old man's voice unwavering. "However, you will not be able to use internal energy in that state. It is miraculous enough that you are able to move in the first place. No need to keep fighting. I will put you to sleep." The old man's sword suddenly glowed with a deep purple energy, illuminating the battlefield with an eerie light. Without hesitation, he swung his weapon at the boy, sending a wave of powerful energy forward. The Phantom Swordsman gritted his teeth, raising his own sword to block the attack. The force was immense, but he managed to hold his ground. The old man suddenly stepped forward and drove a powerful kick into the boy's stomach. The impact was crushing, sending the young warrior flying backward. His body crashed onto the hard earth with a loud thud, dust and debris rising into the air. But just as he thought the battle was won, the boy planted his hands firmly on the ground. With a swift motion, he kicked his legs upward, striking the old man's hand with precise force. The old man's sword was knocked from his grasp, spinning high into the air before vanishing from his reach. The Phantom Swordsman rose from the ground, his expression filled with anger. Without hesitation, he lunged at the old man, attacking with both his sword and his leg in a relentless assault. The old man swiftly tilted his head to the side, barely avoiding the sharp edge of the blade. Still wounded his cheek a little bit, but he was not fast enough to dodge the boy's kick. The strike landed squarely on his face, and he was sent crashing onto the ground. Lying on the earth, the old man slowly lifted his head, his eyes filled with determination. "I will not let you." But before he could finish his sentence, he froze. The space in front of him was empty. His eyes widened in shock as he looked around. Where did he go? Before he could react, a sudden presence loomed behind him. The boy had reappeared in midair, his sword rushing backward for a fierce strike. The old man's instincts screamed danger. He turned his head quickly, worry flashing in his eyes as he saw the attack coming straight for him. The battlefield was silent now, except for the faint rustling of the wind. Two boys sat on the earth. One of them was Phantom Swordsman. One boy leaned against his sword, letting its weight rest on his shoulder. His voice broke the silence. "Phantom Swordsman, have you killed the old demon head?" The Phantom Swordsman nodded, his expression calm yet unreadable. "Now that he is dead, this bloodbath, which shall go down in history as the Shangxi massacre, should be over." The other boys' gaze drifted across the lifeless bodies sprawled across the ground and their weapons also. Blood painted the earth, the red staining the soil as if it would never wash away. His voice was filled with bitterness. "Shitheads." Phantom Swordsman spoke. They appeared out of nowhere, calling themselves the Black Knight Palace. They swept through more than a dozen smaller sects and clans in the last 3 days. A faint smile formed on his lips as he continued. Thanks to that, the world was able to witness the alliance of two rivals, the orthodox and unorthodox factions. As he spoke, the boy beside him suddenly lowered his head, his eyes closed, his face serious. His voice cut through the air, quiet. "Dako Hien, about the promise to have a duel after creating our own sword techniques. I believe I will not be able to fulfill it." Blood was pouring from his body. Dako Hien's sharp eyes locked onto him. "That is what you are thinking about while dying?" the boy remained in the same position, his head slightly lowered, as if accepting his fate. His tone was steady, yet there was a weight behind his words. He let out a small chuckle, of course. We have dedicated our entire lives to the sword. I have fought countless martial artists and witnessed many sword techniques, but I have yet to see one as hard to deal with and as keen as yours. Your devotion to the sword surpasses everyone else's. It is because of that I can ask you this. Dako Hien asked with confusion, what are you trying to say? The boy did not answer immediately. Instead, he let out a slow breath before speaking again, his voice filled with sadness. Please look after my disciple. The Manhwa Sect. Dako Hien's eyes widened, his body tensing as he processed the words. His voice rose in frustration. Are you out of your mind? Did you forget who I am because you are dying? You are asking the best swordsman of the unorthodox faction to look after the Manhwa Sect? What the hell? Kind of before he could finish, the boy slowly reached out and placed a small object on his hand. A string of dark wooden and black beads rested on his hand. The boy smiled faintly, his voice calm. The plum blossom spirit beads. It is Manhwa's relic. Please give it to the sect leader. Dako Hien stared at him as anger flickered across his face. His jaw clenched. I myself am on the brink of death, you know. Are you not asking too much of me? The boy smirked despite his weakening body, his voice carrying a rare warmth. We are each other's only sword friends. It is embarrassing to say, but I have always been grateful. Dako Hien scoffed, his sharp eyes glinting with their usual arrogance. Of course, you should. Thanks to you, I am going to spend the rest of my life in Manhwa. Instead of before he could finish, a sudden wave of purple energy shot through the air, slicing through the battlefield with terrifying force. The impact was instant. Blood splattered everywhere. The boy was gone. Only a severed arm lay behind him on the blood-soaked earth. Dako Hien's body froze. His mind struggled to process what had just happened. His breath hitched as his wide eyes locked onto the lonely, lifeless limb. Then rage surged through him and his eyes burned with revenge, his fists clenching, his teeth grinding in fury. Who the fuck did that? Before he could even react, a shadow stepped into view. A man stood in front of him, his long hair flowing in the wind, his face hidden behind a mask. His presence was overwhelming, radiating an aura of death. The masked man raised a hand, energy swirling around his palm. Without warning, he released a barrage of energy beams straight toward Dako Hien. His eyes widened in shock. He had never known what to do. The air crackled with raw power, and before he could fully comprehend what was happening, the man gathered even more energy, both hands now glowing with a sinister purple light. With a sudden motion, he unleashed the attack. The energy erupted in a violent blast, engulfing Dako Hien completely. A searing pain tore through his body. As he collapsed to his knees, blood poured from his mouth and all body was wounded from which blood dripped, staining the ground beneath him. He looked at the earth, his thoughts racing in disbelief. No way. How can someone be this strong? His body barely able to stay upright. His vision blurred, but he forced himself to focus on the masked man standing before him. Then a realization struck him, and his eyes sharpened. The Black Knight Palace Master? But almost immediately, he shook his head, rejecting the thought. No, I know I killed him. His corpse is still where I left it, too. His gaze remained fixed on the masked figure, his mind racing. Then is he a hidden disciple? Or maybe this guy is the real Black Knight Palace Master. His heart pounded as he continued. I get that he is incomparably stronger than the Black Knight Palace Master. I may have been weakened by my fight against him, but this man was able to take my entire arm with just demonic energy. His eyes flickered to the severed arm lying on the ground, his sword friend's arm. A painful sadness washed over him. His fingers trembled as he clenched his fist. Sorry, bud. I did not even get a chance to take your body back to your home. But at the very least, I will keep my promise. He felt the weight of the plum blossom spirit beads in his hand. The cold beads pressed against his skin, a reminder of the final wish entrusted to him. With a sharp breath, he turned on his heel and sprinted away from the masked man, his feet kicking up dust as he ran. His mind was clear, his thoughts focused. I do not know if I will be able to survive falling off a cliff after losing him. But if there is hope, I have to believe in it. As he ran, he turned his head slightly, casting one last glare at the masked man. His sharp eyes burned with anger and determination. I may be running away now, but I will not forget you. Dako Hien kept running, his breath ragged, his body screaming in pain, but his mind was locked onto a single thought. The moment we meet again will be your last. But as he turned his head back while running, something strange happened. In an instant, the masked man was no longer behind him. Before he could process it, a shadow landed heavily in front of him, blocking his path. His eyes widened, a sharp breath escaping him in shock. Before he could react, the masked man's attack came crashing down. He gritting his teeth as he faced the overwhelming force. You fucker, the impact was devastating. Blood erupted into the air by the sheer power of the attack. The pain was unbearable, but more than that, the realization struck him deep. He looked at his trembling, blood-covered hand, the plum blossom spirit bead still wrapped tightly around his wrist. A deep sadness filled his fading consciousness. I am really sorry, friend. But I do not think I will be able to keep that promise. A deep darkness surrounded him. His body felt weightless, as if floating between life and death. The scene shifted that, through the emptiness, distant voices echoed in his mind. I can feel his pulse. What is it? The heavens helped. His thoughts stirred, struggling to break through the fog. Am I still alive? A new voice, clearer than the rest, reached his ears. Urgent, desperate. Senior disciple. Please, wake up. Slowly, his heavy eyelids began to open. His vision was blurry, the world around him unfocused. Shapes moved before him, figures he did not recognize. His mind was still clouded, but one thought stood out among the confusion. Why is he calling me senior disciple? A shaky breath of relief came from the young man beside him. He has opened his eyes. Another voice, filled with disbelief and hope, called out. Elder Beck Jean. The senior disciple has opened his eyes. He asked with disbelief. Are you serious? Dako Hien lay there, his body wrapped in countless bandages. Every inch of him ached, but it was nothing compared to the question burning in his mind. The old man sat nearby, his face buried in his hands as he trembled with emotion. His voice broke as he spoke, filled with relief and sorrow. You did great, Mu Wai. Stay right here with us. Dako Hien's mind was still clouded, his body weak, but he forced himself to focus. He tried to recognize the man before him. This man is. Before he could complete the thought, a faint smile appeared on old man tired face, his eyes filled with gratitude as he said, I did try acupuncture, but I had thought it was too late. The heavens helped. Yuanshi Tianzuan. A sudden realization struck Dako Hien. His mind cleared just enough for the name to register. Manhwa's Elder Beck Jean. Instinctively, he tried to move, but pain shot through his body, forcing him to stop. Before he could attempt again, the old man spoke in a firm but gentle voice. Stay still, Mu Wai. Dako Hien froze. His breath hitched as confusion swirled in his mind. Why is he calling me Mu Wai? The name echoed in his thoughts, and his mind quickly searched for an answer. Mu Wai is the senior disciple of the Manhwa Sect second-generation disciples. He is Hyunjo's disciple. His heartbeat quickened. Why am I being called by his name, though? Has this old man lost his damn mind? But before he could finish the thought, something flashed in his memory. Forcing his dry lips to part, he turned his head slightly toward the man sitting beside him. His voice was hoarse as he tried to ask. The light from back then. But before he could finish, the young man beside him quickly interrupted, his expression filled with worry. Sorry, senior disciple. Your wounds have not closed yet. You should not speak. Dako Hien's chest tightened. His mind was racing, yet his body refused to move. Elder Baek Jin stood in front of a shelf, preparing some medicine. He glanced at Dako Hien, who was walking toward the exit. Hand asked casually, "Are you going out?" Dako Hien nodded, his face unreadable. "Yes, I am." He was going to reply in his usual blunt tone. But he caught himself just in time. As he thought, I almost replied rudely. Baek Jin turned slightly, giving him a knowing look. "All right. It is not a bad idea to move around for a bit. But with that being said, you were bedridden and unable to eat properly for the past week, so you must not push yourself too far. Do you understood?" Dako Hien gave a small nod before stepping outside. The fresh air hit his skin, but it did little to ease the storm raging in his mind. His steps were slow and uncertain, his body still weak. He found a small well near Sect having big stone walls. He sat down at the edge, his reflection staring back at him from the still water. He washed his face in water through his fingers dripping down, mixing with the gentle ripples of the water. His voice barely came out, a whisper lost in the wind. 7 days. It has only been 7 days. He stared into the water, at the face that no longer felt like his own. I feel like it has been at least a year. His mind was a blur of memories that were not his own. Every time he closed his eyes, he was trapped in a life he had never lived. The past 7 days I dreamed of a life. A life filled with memories of a boy training with a sword, struggling, growing, laughing. The life of Mu Wai. The 2 decades Mu Wai lived through. They were now a part of him. The memory of that night came rushing back to him unforgiving. Flames roared around them, engulfing everything in their path. The sky was feel like painted red with smoke and ground with blood. Amidst the chaos, Mu Wai fought bravely, his sword cutting through countless enemies. Then, in the heat of battle, a sharp blade pierced his chest. The pain was unbearable, his strength fading rapidly. Dako Hien recalled the scene. His sharp eyes burned with frustration. What an absolute fool. With a body so weak, he should have put himself before everyone else. He placed a hand on his chest, feeling the thick layers of bandages covering his wound. The pain still lingered beneath them. His voice was low, but firm. Because of this injury, he died. His mind flashed to another memory of his own hand, trembling and drenched in blood. But within the darkness of that moment, the plum blossom spirit beads had glowed. The mysterious light had enveloped him, and in the next moment, he had woken up here. That light, it must have come from the plum blossom spirit beads. But why me? He turned his gaze to the water, looking at his reflection once more. He asked himself while seeing the face Mu Wai, and why did I end up as him? Why not Hyun-jo? Is this also fate? He stood up and turned toward Sect, his thoughts racing. Even if I may not like it, it does not change the fact that I was given another chance at life. I can't just throw out this chance. His heart burned with renewed resolve as his thoughts shifted to the masked man. His eyes darkened with rage. That fucking masked bastard. I will be sure to find and cut them up into pieces. He gritted his teeth, remembering the overwhelming power that had crushed him. He is definitely stronger than the Black Knight Palace Master. I would have died to him even if I were not injured. He exhaled sharply, his fury simmering into focus. That means in order to have any chance of beating him. Dako Hien moved inside, his steps slow but determined as he walked up the stairs. His mind was sharp. His thoughts burned with a single goal. I must grow stronger than my previous self. As he reached inside, a voice from past echoed in his mind. Hyun-jo's words came back to him clearly. Please look after my disciple. The Manhwa sect. His resolve grew. Disciples, have no fear. We must be the ones to protect the Manhwa sect. His eyes scanned the room filled of books, and without hesitation, he picked up a worn-out book and placed it on the wooden table, where many other books lay scattered. He sat down on the floor in front of them. Do not worry, Hyun-jo. I will make sure to fulfill that promise. As well as avenge your death. No matter what. Meanwhile, in another part of the sect, a serious discussion was taking place. Four old men sat together, their faces marked with concern. The sect leader, voice was calm, but the weight of the question was heavy. Do we need to rebuild a total of 8 pavilions? Baek-san, one of the elders, nodded with a deep sigh. Yes, sect leader. The damages grew because we were unable to put out the last ambush's fire in a timely manner. The sect leader leaned back. The beams of the pavilions had been weakened by the fire, their once strong structures are now charred and brittle. He took a deep breath before speaking again. I assume we do not have enough money for all of that because of our previous damages. Is it so, Baek-san? Baek-san hesitated, then slowly nodded, said with worry, it is true. On top of that, profits and visitors will be cut down drastically for a while. The Manhwa sect had suffered heavy losses, and now they had to rebuild with little resources. Sect leader Baek deep in thought. He furrowed his brows with concern. We better avoid large expenditures. His voice was steady but filled with caution as he advised, let's start with the most important pavilion first. He turned toward Baek-jin and asked, how are the disciples recovering? Baek-jin nodded and said, they are all recovering smoothly. The gravely injured disciples are also much better, so do not worry. Baek-yu's lips curled into a firm smile. That is good. But then, his expression softened as he thought about a particular disciple. How is Mu-wai? The news regarding Hyun-jo must have been shocking, to say the least. Baek-jin's expression remained calm as he replied, he actually took it better than I expected. His wounds have healed quite a bit too. He was walking around outside yesterday. Baek-san asked with a laugh, really? Baek-yu said, it is good if he is actually taking it well, but do check in on him once in a while. Then, as his mind drifted to the past. You know very well what kind of child Mu-wai was. And his concern slipping through his composed expression. I am worried that he might just be pretending to be alright. I hope he will get through it okay. At that moment Dako Hyun sat on the carpeted ground, his legs crossed as the ancient book rested on them. His fingers lightly traced the worn pages while his sharp eyes scanned the words. As he examined the skills written in the book, a thought surfaced in his mind. How are they? His memory drifted to the past, to a moment when Mu-wai was practicing while Hyung-jo and he watched in silence. Was more focused on the conversation unfolding between them. Dako Hyun asked with curiosity what Mu-wai meant. Mu-wai's gaze remained on the disciples as he answered. The Manhwa sect's disciples. Hyung-jo, standing beside Dako Hyun, asked him while looking forward what he thought. Dako Hyun replied with carelessness useless. Hyung-jo only nodded as if he had expected that answer. His voice was calm as he said that the Manhwa sect, as it was now, was regressing. His eyes moved across the training grounds, watching the disciples swinging their swords tirelessly. Then he explained to Dako Hyun while observing them, saying that people claimed the sword technique was the pinnacle of variability and illusions that brought the plum blossoms into bloom, but they fooled themselves into believing it was perfection. He was sure that Dako Hyun understood what awaited a sect incapable of reflecting and developing new path is. Before Hyung-jo could finish his words, Dako Hyun completed the sentence while saying downfall. His voice carried certainty as he agreed. Hyung-jo was right. There was no use in trying to force change. But if he had been in Hyung-jo's position, he would have tried to force change. His sharp gaze locked onto trainees, and he asked with curiosity if he had another idea then. Hyung-jo spoke with determination. His eyes burned with passion as he said it was to show them that the plum blossom sword technique was not all there was, that there was a higher realm they could reach. Dako Hyun turned his eyes toward him, his expression unreadable. He asked with sharp eyes if that was why he came up with the promise to create their own sword techniques and duel with them in the future. Memories flooded his mind like a rushing river. He thought about all those moments and realized with admiration that Hyung-jo had reached this realm by renovating various martial techniques. He had believed it would be possible with him since he was called the Phantom Swordsman, the best swordsman of the unorthodox faction. His thought about the young disciples of the Manhwa sect, their movements filled with hesitation and struggle. He thought that when he first saw them, he believed the problem lay in Manhwa itself. They were called a renowned sect, yet for the last 100 years, they had failed to produce anyone talented other than Hyung Jo. However, he now realized how foolish that thought had been. His face traced the worn pages of the martial arts book, his mind deep in contemplation. He thought about the techniques he had seen, the six-fold combo circulation technique and the six-fold combo sword technique. Both were flawless. Martial techniques became more powerful with time as they passed through the hands of different warriors. That was the true power of a sect. Manhwa had hit a wall not because it was weak, but because it was too great. He now understood the loyal determination to get through this wall by showing the disciples a new realm. If that was what Hyung Jo had thought of, then perhaps this path was the right one. Dako Hien closed the book with a swift sound, the crisp noise echoing through the quiet room. His voice was firm as he said that the new sword technique Hyung Jo had not completed, he would complete in his stead as a way to compromise on the promise they had made. His eyes carried the weight of their past and of the path that still lay ahead. He placed the book gently on the wooden table. His mind was filled with deep thoughts as he realized that the sword technique would have to be only and wholly Manhwa's. It could not just be the form and movements that belonged to Manhwa, but its very intentions had to be the same as well. He understood that to truly create this technique, he had to enlighten himself on the teachings of Manhwa. Starting from the very basics, he would retrace the steps of those who came before him. Dako Hien took a deep breath steadily as he calmed his mind. He was sitting in a quartet style with his legs folded neatly beneath him. His hands rested gently on his lap, fingers touching in a meditative posture. A faint glow of light blue energy produced from his hands began flowing around his body, swirling like mist, embracing him in its gentle warmth. His thoughts grew sharper as he emptied his mind. He told himself to erase all the martial arts and teachings that Mu Wai had learned. Even if he tried to learn the same techniques, the interpretation and the lessons gained would be different. What Mu Wai had mastered in the past was not his own. He could not claim another understanding as his own truth. His gaze darkened with determination as he reminded himself not to underestimate this practice simply because it was the very basics. The autumn flower circulation technique, he felt its energy coursing through him. Its speed did not fall behind that of the ghost arts, and unlike unorthodox techniques, it held remarkable stability. He reflected on his past life, how he had always sought efficiency, relying solely on unorthodox sword techniques. But the sword techniques of Manhwa were different. A firm smile formed on his lips as he acknowledged this difference. He might learn something completely different from everything he had known before. His sharp eyes gleamed with the thrill of challenge, a new-found fire burning within him. This was no longer for the phantom swordsman, Dako Hien, the man who only cared about the sword. That life had ended. From now on, he was Mu Wai. The sun hung high in the sky, casting its golden rays over Manhwa. However, the stillness was suddenly broken by hurried footsteps climbing the stone stairs. A young trainee arrived outside a wooden door. He shouted with urgency, calling out for Dako Hien. But no response came from inside. He called again, this time louder, hoping to get an answer. Inside the room, Dako Hien sat cross-legged on the wooden floor, his sword resting beside him. His focus was entirely on his training, his mind deep in concentration as he practiced a complex sword technique. The sudden voice outside disturbed the silence. Slowly, he opened one eye, glancing toward the door, irritated by the unexpected interruption. With steady steps, he walked over and opened the door. His eyes met the trainee standing before him, and for a moment, he hesitated. Then, he recognized the young boy. He spoke uncertainly, questioning if he was Mu Chiol. His voice soon became firmer as he confirmed his recognition and then asked with curiosity why Mu Chiol had come looking for him. Mu Chiol's expression was serious, his gaze unwavering as he explained the reason for his visit. He had come to check on Dako Hien because it had been 3 days since he last left the Harmony Medicine Palace. Despite this, he had not shown up for the morning training sessions even once. His absence had caused concern among the disciples. Dako Hyun's face showed confusion as he processed Mu Chiol's words. What 3 days? Had that much time really passed? He looked at Mu Chiol, waiting for some kind of reassurance, and Mu Chiol simply nodded, confirming the truth. Dako Hyun stood in silence for a moment before his mind drifted to a memory. He recalled how, not long ago, he had been unable to eat properly for 7 days. The thought triggered a deeper recollection as he remembered the time he had been trapped in the Blood Tempest Sect's inescapable net tactic. The experience had been grueling, pushing him to the limits of his endurance. But he shook off the memory, focusing on the present. He took a deep breath, his expression growing calmer. Speaking in a composed tone, he admitted that he had not realized so much time had passed. Without wasting any more time, he turned to Mu Chiol and suggested that they head to the training hall together. Mu Chiol responded with a firm voice while turning away, agreeing with Dako Hyun. As he turned his head slightly, confusion flickered across his face. Something about Dako Hyun felt different, but the thought lingered in his mind as he stepped down the stairs. Dako Hyun remained standing still on the upper floor. A quiet sigh escaped his lips as he thought. A drink would be really good right now. What a shame. But instead of indulging in his desires, he turned away, preparing to head toward the training hall. Meanwhile, the training hall was alive with movement. The air filled with the sharp sound of swords slicing through the wind as trainees practiced in unison. Their focused eyes followed every command given by the instructor. The trainer moved with a firm voice, he called out the command, his sword cutting forward in a smooth arc. Rising plum blossoms, abundant and swaying, at once, the trainees shouted together, their voices ringing in harmony as they moved their swords into position. Their movements were synchronized, yet not perfect. The instructor's sharp gaze caught a flaw in one trainee's stance. Without hesitation, he raised his voice, calling out to correct him. Mu Ryan, raise your arm higher. Mu Ryan glanced at his sword, realizing his mistake. He nodded in acknowledgement, quickly adjusting his stance. Dako Hyun stood at the side, quietly observing the practice session. His sharp eyes analyzed each movement with a critical gaze. As I had expected, they are just as terrible as ever. His thoughts were filled with disappointment as he noticed the same recurring flaws. Their feet keep moving when they should not because they are unable to maintain balance. That lack of stability worsens their weight distribution, making their attacks weak. They are unable to put real strength into their strikes because of that. Their posture is completely off too. This is a damn mess. His gaze then shifted toward the instructor standing on the upper platform, overseeing the training. At the very least, the instructor is not that bad. His mind searched for a name, trying to recall what he had heard before. Was it Mu Jin? Yes, it is a good thing that there is at least one proper guy here. Dako Hyun thought with a small smile, his gaze still fixed on Mu Jin. He is correcting them well too. His observations deepened as he continued analyzing the situation. He is more like the senior disciple of the second-generation disciples. Why is he doing something that the senior disciple should be doing? His thoughts turned inward, reflecting on the personality of the original owner of his body. It seemed like the owner had quite a shy nature, along with a clear lack of martial arts skills and leadership abilities. In contrast, Mu Jin stood out. He knows how to lead others. His calm personality and sharp sense of judgment made him a natural guide for the trainees. He had shown great potential ever since he was young. It makes sense that more disciples listen to him rather than the actual senior disciple. Dako Hyun continued, his expression unreadable. It is only natural that those with talent and skill are given opportunities. He has both the ability and the right personality, so I have nothing to say against him taking on the role of a senior disciple. Until now, that is for training. His eyes gleamed with a newfound sense of determination as he watched the trainees wrap up their session. The training had come to an end, and the exhausted disciples started dispersing. One trainee sighed with relief, as he spoke. I am beat. Another trainee, walking beside him, shared his own thoughts in voice of carried a hint of frustration. I feel like Mu-jin has been a lot stricter recently. His words reflected the growing pressure that all of them had been feeling under Mu-jin's leadership. Just then, one trainee noticed Dako Hien standing nearby. He called out, his voice filled with recognition. Senior disciple, you are here. Another trainee turned to him, he showing concern as he asked if he was feeling alright. Dako Hien gave a slight nod, his expression calm as he assured him that he was fine. His words were simple, but there was a firm confidence behind them. Among the trainees, a girl took a deep breath, her gaze fixed on Dako Hien. As she observed him closely, something feels different about him. Her thoughts swirled in confusion. What had changed? Just then, Mu-jin descended from the stairs, his steps measured and composed. His eyes met Dako Hien's as he addressed him with respect. You are here, senior disciple. His voice remained steady as he added an explanation, apologizing for not properly greeting him earlier since he had been in the middle of training. Dako Hien turned his head slightly upward and back, his expression serious as he looked at Mu-jin, who had stopped halfway down the stairs. Yes, Mu-jin. It must be hard doing something that I should be doing. His sharp gaze studied Mu-jin carefully. A thought crossed his mind as he observed him. He is not going to come down the stairs. Mu-jin remained in place, then bent forward slightly with his eyes closed, showing his respect. No, senior disciple. I am just thankful that you let me do it. His voice was sincere, without hesitation. Dako Hien's expression did not waver as he gave a clear response. I will be doing it from now on. Mu-jin's eyes opened slightly in the same bowed position. The weight of those words hung in the air, catching the attention of the trainees. The girl among them widened her eyes in shock. What? Did I hear that right? Another trainee turned to her, as he responded uncertainly. I am not sure. Mu-cheol stood at the side, his gaze fixed on Dako Hien. As he observed him with growing certainty, he thought, so it was not just me being too sensitive. He is definitely changed. Mu-jin locked eyes with Dako Hien. His voice carried a firm tone as he reminded him of the past. You told me to do this before. Dako Hien remained calm and without hesitation, he questioned him back. What is wrong with me choosing to take on my own responsibility again? Mu-jin did not back down. He explained with a serious expression. You had me do it because you did not have the confidence that you would be able to carry it out properly. Dako Hien listened, then a small smile tugged at the corner of his lips as he thought. I knew it. This idiot wants to be the head disciple. His mind drifted to deeper thoughts. The head disciple is a disciple that has the ability to succeed the role of the sect leader. That position held great significance, shaping the future of Manhwa. He continued analyzing the current state of the sect. Right now, there are much fewer first-generation disciples because of the Shangxi massacre. The remaining first-generation disciples and the elders are preoccupied with the reconstruction of the sect. If I want to change the Manhwa sect, it will be much more efficient to focus on changing the second-generation disciples, the future of the sect, rather than trying to influence the elders and first-generation disciples who are already set in their ways. A deeper realization strengthened his resolve. On top of that, there is the purple aura circulation technique, which only the sect leader and the head disciple of Manhwa can learn. That technique is among the top 10 most powerful circulation techniques when it comes to generating internal energy. His eyes sharpened slightly as he thought about his true goal. I need that technique in order to surpass the me from my previous life. If I want to reach my full potential, I have to become the head disciple. Mu-jin's voice filled with accusation. Do you think that you have the right? When the Black Knight Palace invaded the sect, what did you do? Mu-cheol's expression tensed with concern. He could sense the tension rising between them. Without thinking, he called out in a worried voice. Mu-jin, but Mu-jin did not stop. His frustration had already taken over, and he continued speaking. Despite the elders and others telling you to stay put, you did not listen to them. What happened as a result of that? Did you save the elders and others? Did you slay anyone from the Black Knight Palace? Dako Hien took a deep breath. His lips curved into a calm smile as he met Mu Jin's anger with an unshaken expression. No, he said evenly. You only managed to burden the elders. Mu Jin's voice rising with fury. That is not all. Because of what you did, several other disciples followed suit. If the first-generation disciples had not risked their lives to protect them, many people would not be here right now. Dako Hien remained still, then slowly nodded. His voice carried no hesitation as he responded. You are right. I agree with you. Therefore, I intend on taking responsibility now as the senior disciple. Before he could say more, Mu Jin cut him off, his eyes burn with rage. How are we supposed to trust you? Dako Hien did not answer immediately. Instead, he took a step forward, moving up onto the stairs where Mu Jin stood, his posture radiating quiet confidence. Then, he spoke with clarity. You seem to be misunderstanding something. Mu Jin's expression shifted slightly, his brows drawing together in confusion. What am I misunderstand? Dako Hien's sharp gaze locked onto Mu Jin, as he declared his stance. Since when did I have to look up to you? His words carried weight. Does it sound like I am trying to convince you? His authority now undeniable. Do I have to ask for your permission in the choices I make? I am notifying you right now. I am not trying to convince you. Mu Jin's eyes widened slightly, his thoughts racing in disbelief. What the hell? Is this man in front of me really the same senior disciple that I know? The man who once hesitated, who once avoided responsibility, was he truly the same person? But Dako Hien did not stop there. As he said, I will take over the morning training starting tomorrow. If you have complaints, come see me after the morning training tomorrow. Without waiting for a response, he turned and moved up the stairs. Mu Jin stood frozen, his head slowly turning to watch Dako Hien ascend. His disbelief was evident in his expression. Dako Hien said without turning his tone that almost seemed amused. Do not be too upset. Mu Jin, still trying to process everything, spoke without thinking. You seem like a completely different person, senior disciple. His voice was tinged with confusion, as if he was speaking to a stranger rather than someone he had known for years. Dako Hien continued walking, not slowing down as he responded. They say that a person changes when they come back from the brink of death. I guess you can say that is what it is. As his figure slightly disappeared beyond the stairs, a murmur of voices erupted from the training hall. One trainee turned to the others, his voice filled with confusion. What just happened? A trainee shook his head, still trying to grasp the situation. I do not really get it either. Another voice joined in, this time belonging to Mu Ryan. I heard Mu Jin getting mad, but is the senior disciple really taking over the training now? The girl hesitated before nodding. It seems like it, Mu Ryan. Mu Ryan nodded slightly, his expression thoughtful. Yes. It seems like Mu Jin is going to let the senior disciple take over. The trainee girl still processing the conversation. Yes, at first, he was really mad. Then, he calmed down. I could not hear the conversation after that, but his face before she could finish, Mu Ryan interrupted, his tone filled with concern. Yes, he backed off out of kindness. I am worried. I know the senior disciple's skill level. The girl spoke again. What if we do the same then? Mu Ryan asked with confusion. What do you mean? She took a breath, then explained. Well, let's just try talking to him. Later that night, under the dim glow of moon, the girl and boy walked quietly through the hall, their footsteps barely echoing against the floor. As they approached the senior disciple's room, but before they could knock, a calm voice came from inside. What is it? One of them spoke. You are not sleeping yet. I came to talk to you. There is something I need to talk about while away from the others. Inside the room, Dako Hien sat on the floor, his sword resting beside him. His fingers tightened slightly around the hilt, a habit from years of instinct. His voice carried curiosity as he responded. That makes me very curious to know what you want to talk about. The knight carrying the faint rustle of leaves as Dako Hien stepped outside his room. His wooden sword rested in his hand. He moved forward, stopping on the slightly elevated floor in front of the two trainees, Mu Ho and Mu San. Great light from the moon cast over the courtyard, making the tension between them even more apparent. Mu San's thoughts swirled with confusion as his eyes fixed on the wooden sword. Senior disciple is using a wooden sword? It is unlike him to do that. As he tried to make sense of the situation. Beside him, Mu Ho's gaze was sharp, as she spoke. I will get right to the point. Senior disciple, please take back what you said today. Mu Jin only backed off from the discussion because he wanted to help you preserve your image. Her tone was direct, carrying the weight of her frustration. Dako Hien remained still, rubbing the back of his neck with an unreadable expression. Interesting. Did he send you guys? His voice was calm, but there was something unsettling in the way he spoke. Mu Ho immediately denied it, her tone firm. No, we came here on our own will. Dako Hien expression shifting slightly as he understood their intentions. Is that so? Either way, you have no say in this matter. I will pretend I did not hear what you said, so go back. His words were final, carrying no room for argument. Mu Ho's frustration boiled over, her fists clenching as she shouted with anger. Senior disciple. We request that you please consider our perspective too. Does it really seem like we are doing this because we do not like you? We simply want to be taught by someone who is actually skilled. Take a look at yourself right now. Your skills are subpar. This is you being greedy, that is all. Her voice echoed through the night, raw with emotion. The night air grew heavier with tension as Mu San clenched his fists, his anger boiling over. His voice rang through the ground, filled with defiance. We will not accept someone as our leader if they are beneath us. His words challenging the very authority of the senior disciple standing before them. Dako Hien's expression remained same, a mysterious glint flickering in his eyes. Manhwa's hierarchy seems to have degraded. His voice was calm, yet there was a sharpness beneath it. Without hesitation, he tightened his grip on his wooden sword, his stance unwavering as he issued a challenge. I understand what you mean. Since you doubt my skills, I will prove it to you. Wield your swords. Mu San's eyes widened in shock. Senior disciple, are you serious? He unable to believe what he had just heard. Dako Hien nodded, his steps slow but deliberate as he advanced toward them. I understand how you feel. His tone carried only certainty. Mu Ho's eyes burned with determination as she pushed her sword out from her belt. You asked for this. Without hesitation, she rushed toward Dako Hien, her speed sharp. Her voice rose with anger. Do not regret it later on, but before her blade could reach him, Dako Hien in one swift motion, his wooden sword struck her arm with precision. A sharp pain shot through her, and her sword flew into the air, slipping from her grasp. Her eyes widened in shock as she lost control. Her body staggered, and before she could hit the ground face first, she managed to land on her knees and hands, barely protecting herself from the impact. Mu San gasped in disbelief, he screamed loudly. His eyes darted toward Dako Hien, but before he could fully react, Dako Hien's gaze shifted toward him. There was no hesitation in his movements. As Mu San lunged forward, his sword ready to strike, Dako Hien struck first. The wooden blade moved with force, hitting Mu San's face in a single and precise motion. Mu San's body jolted backward as pain exploded through him. His feet lost their balance, and he was thrown onto the ground with a heavy thud. His sword landed at a distance across the dirt. Mu Ho took a painful breath. Her voice filled with disappointment as she spoke in a broken tone. Senior disciple, we lose. She lowered her gaze, unable to meet Dako Hien's eyes. Dako Hien's grip tightened as he held onto the back of her collar, his voice firm and unwavering. Obviously, you did. But now it is time for the two of you to be taught a lesson. His words sent a chill down Mu Ho's spine. Her eyes widened in shock and then confusion flashing across her face. That what was he talking about? Some time later, Mu Ho was sitting on the ground, her knees pressing against the cold tiles. Her body ached, and exhaustion weighed her down. Nearby, Mu-san lay face down, his hands pinned together behind his back, completely immobilized. His face was pressed against the hard surface, his breathing slow and uneven. Dako Hien stood tall before them, his wooden sword planted vertically into the ground. His expression was serious as he looked down at them and said, "So, have I satisfied your requirements?" Both Mu Ho and Mu-san quickly nodded, their pride crushed beneath the undeniable reality of their defeat. Dako Hien's gaze did not soften. He remained commanding as he continued. "Remind me, what did I say was going to happen if other disciples tried to gang up on me like you two did again?" As they immediately responded, their voices hurried and fearful. "We will get a beating along with them." Dako Hien let their words settle before he asked another question, his tone unwavering. "Am I weaker than Mu Jin?" Mu Ho, her face covered in wounds and swollen from the fight, shook her head desperately. "Not at all. You are much stronger." Her voice was filled with certainty. Dako Hien's sharp gaze shifted to Mu-san. "And do you still think I am weaker than the disciples?" Mu-san, still lying on the ground, quickly denied, his voice firm despite his weakened state. "Absolutely not." Dako Hien's voice was calm but firm as he spoke. "All right, it seems you guys have learned your lesson. I will forget about what happened today. Everyone makes mistakes. It is almost time for morning training, so get some rest." Mu Ho and Mu-san give a quick response, their bodies still aching from the fight. Their voices carried gratitude as they spoke. "Thank you for your mercy, senior disciple." Their steps were unsteady as they turned away, leaning on each other for support while walking off into the distance. The sound of their footsteps faded as they disappeared. Dako Hien remained where he stood, his gaze still fixed in the direction they had gone. His expression did not change as he spoke again, his tone carrying a sharp edge. "How long will you keep yourself hidden? Come on out." A rustling sound followed his words. From behind the trees, Mu Chiol stepped forward, his expression unreadable. His eyes met Dako Hien's as he asked with curiosity. "You knew where I was?" Dako Hien's sharp eyes shifted toward him and voice was steady. "How can I not with your size?" "What is it, Mu Chiol?" Mu Chiol brushed his hand over his shoulder, flicking off a few leaves that had clung to his clothing. "Well, I just saw Mu-san and Mu Ho head this way." His tone was casual, but there was something more behind his words. Dako Hien's thought. Who are Mu-san and Mu Ho? The question lingered in his mind. Mu Chiol took another step forward, his expression shifting as he continued. "So I followed them here just in case, but I did not think you would win against them." Dako Hien exhaled sharply, a hint of frustration flashing across his face. "Those two from just now?" Mu Chiol asked, his voice calm but pressing. "Have you been hiding your true skills all this time?" Dako Hien's expressions was unreadable as his thoughts ran deep. "From what I have observed, the second-generation disciples fall into two types. Those who maintain their distance from Mu Wai while still showing him the respect he deserves, and those who discreetly look down on him and speak poorly about him." His mind sorted through the memories of interactions he had witnessed over time. However, Mu Chiol does not belong to either of those categories. He has actually helped Mu Wai often. He has a rather blunt and indifferent personality, though. So, why did he help Mu Wai? A slight crease formed on Dako Hien's forehead as he considered the question. "I think it is because Mu Wai was young that he did not understand the reason when he was in this body." "Well, I think there is a simple reason for that." His gaze subtly softened, the answer forming clearly in his mind. He is just worried. The reason Mu Chiol is willing to help Mu Wai is because Mu Wai is weak so much so that he actually needs help. Mu Chiol was worried that I might get gravely injured by Mu-san and Mu Ho, so he followed them here to make sure I would be alright. His thoughts settled on this conclusion, realization settling in. Mu Cheol has always protected Mu Wei all this time. The understanding weighed on Dako Hien, and for a moment, he hesitated. I better make a somewhat believable excuse. His mind worked quickly, forming a response that would not raise suspicion. He met Mu Cheol's gaze again and spoke in a calm tone. I was not hiding it. I just reached a new realm of understanding. His words carried certainty, leaving no room for doubt. Mu Cheol asked with confusion. Really? You learned a new realm of understanding? His voice carried doubt, but there was also curiosity in his tone. Dako Hien gave a firm nod, his expression calm as he turned away. I will talk about what it is that I learned during morning training. It is late. Go back. His voice left no room for argument, and his footsteps echoed softly as he moved toward the entry door. Mu Cheol observed him for a moment before nodding. Yes, senior disciple. His tone held newfound respect, but as he watched Dako Hien's back disappearing into the night his thoughts raced as he recalled the battle. New realm of understanding. That was definitely just a move from the six-fold combo sword technique, which is a beginner-level technique. The memory of Dako Hien's precise and fluid sword movement replayed in his mind. However, it was executed in the most beautiful way I have ever seen. I wonder what it is that he learned. As he turned toward the stairs, his thoughts deepening. I had always thought that he was extremely weak, but he has changed so much. A flicker of excitement surged within him as he stepped forward. I have never looked forward to morning training this much before. Meanwhile, Dako Hien walked silently. But inside, his thoughts were filled with concern. I did make up an excuse that I reached a new realm, but how am I supposed to explain it now? A quiet sigh escaped him as he continued, already thinking of how to handle the situation. The next morning, in the training hall, Mu Ryan sat with his arms crossed, his face twisted in anger as he glared at Mu San and Mu Ho. His voice was sharp and filled with frustration. So, you guys got beaten up instead? His words making the defeated disciples lower their heads in shame. Mu San sat on the wooden desk, his face filled with disbelief as he explained, that was not the senior disciple we know. His voice carried the weight of shock, as if he was still processing what had happened the night before. Mu Ho, sitting beside him, nodded in agreement, her expression serious and painful. He has turned into a completely different person. Mu Ryan, this is not something we can act on rashly. We almost died. I am serious. Her voice was firm with the lingering fear of their encounter with Dako Hien. Mu San tried to add something, his voice low but urgent. If anyone else disrespects him, he will, but before he could finish, Mu Ryan interrupted, his tone dismissive. It is fine. You guys are just talking nonsense. Go get ready for morning training. He waved them off as if their words meant nothing. Mu San and Mu Ho supporting each other as they walked away. Mu San sighed in disappointment and muttered, he is not believing us at all. He will not try something against the senior disciple, will he? His voice carried a hint of worry. Mu Ho scoffed, shaking her head. I hope he tries and gets beaten to a pulp. Mu San let out a tired sigh. Then we will die too. As they continued walking, Mu Jin happened to pass by and overheard their conversation. Mu Jin's expression remained unreadable as he glanced at the two disciples walking away. Something was off. He asked to Mu Ryan with confusion, did something happen? Mu San and Mu Ho both looked terrible. They are limping too. Mu Ryan let out a relieved breath when he saw Mu Jin. You are here. It is nothing much. It is just about the senior disciple saying that he will lead the morning training from now on. I guess they did not like that. That is what happened. His voice was calm but his words carried an underlying meaning. Mu Jin turned his gaze toward Mu Ryan, his expression calm as he spoke with understanding. I see. I will have to scold them later. Mu Ryan's eyes widened in surprise as he asked, I am sorry, but why? His voice carried genuine confusion, as if he could not understand what Mu Jin found wrong with their actions. Mu Jin responded, even if the senior disciple is standing up for himself now, he will back off once he realizes that he is not fit for the position. What is the use in doing stuff like that behind my back? I am ashamed. His voice was steady, but there was clear disappointment in his tone. Mu Ryan hesitated for a moment before replying with uncertainty. But it is just that we were worried about enough. His voice lacked the same confidence as before, as if he was beginning to doubt himself. Mu Jin exhaled, then turned away as he spoke firmly. I know what you are worried about. I will take care of the matter myself. Do not concern yourself with it. His words were final, leaving no room for argument. Mu Ryan remained still, lost in his thoughts as Mu Jin walked away. The next scene unfolded under the bright morning sun. Dako Hien stood tall in front of the trainees, his wooden sword planted vertically in front of him, his hands resting firmly on its hilt. His gaze swept over the gathered disciples before he spoke in a clear, commanding voice. Everyone, it seems like all of you are here. That is good. I will say a few things before beginning. His tone was calm but carried authority, making it clear that he was in charge. Mu Jin stood among the trainees, as he observed Dako Hien with skeptical eyes. His mind raced with unanswered questions. How could someone change so much overnight? He struggled to believe that the same person they had once thought of as weak had managed to defeat Mu San and Mu Ho so decisively. Has he been hiding his true strength all this time? The thought unsettled him. If Dako Hien had truly concealed his abilities, then it meant they had grossly underestimated him. But another possibility nagged at Mu Jin. Did Mu Cheol help him? It seemed unlikely Mu Cheol was not the type to interfere in fights that were not his concern. However, Mu Jin knew one thing for certain: I will learn the truth sooner or later. I will be able to tell whether he was bluffing or not by how he leads today's training. Meanwhile, Dako Hien remained composed. He addressed them in an authoritative voice. You are all weak. His words cut through the silence, making a few disciples shift uncomfortably. Although there are many reasons someone can become strong, there is only one reason for weakness. It is the basics. Because of that, from now on, we will only train the six-fold combo sword technique during morning training. A murmur spread among the trainees. But Dako Hien remained firm. I am sure you want to quickly get through the basics and move on to higher-level techniques. However, what is wrong with that? His question hung in the air, but before anyone else could respond, Mu Ryan stepped forward, his jaw tightened in frustration. His voice was sharp as he challenged, what is wrong with wanting to learn things quicker? And his thoughts burned with irritation. If you guys cannot do it, then I will. Some exchanged doubtful glances, while others frowned. They had not expected this from their senior disciple. His scowl deepened as he muttered under his breath, renowned sect, my ass. What a fucking mess. Dako Hien's sharp gaze landed on him immediately. His expression remained unreadable, but his eyes held a dangerous edge. His voice was calm as he issued a direct challenge. All right, if you have complaints, come up here, Mu Ryan. The tension in the air thickened.